All right, I think I'm working now.
There we go. Thanks for joining us. Glad we got you linked up here.
Glad to be here.
We'll give it just another minute or so to let people get logged on. And
Now, if I remember correctly, that my instructions were to play cleanup for Whitney and for Carter, so I'm ready.
I don't
My
think
instructions
those
were
are
to,
I gave, but
yeah,
you know.
my instructions were to do whatever Senator and Shasta said. So whatever they do.
We're both good.
Yeah.
Shasta, it's your ball game.
Yeah.
Good. I'm ready.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us for our Western Kentucky Leaders edition of the Kentucky Comeback webinar series. With us today, I'm John Cox from the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I want to introduce our guests. From the he's the executive director of the Southwestern Kentucky Economic Development Council. We have Carter Hendricks. We also have Representative Jason Petrie of the 16th House District, who is also the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. We have Ms. Shasta Wease, a community liaison with the Addiction Recovery Centers based in the Elizabethtown area. And then we have Senator Whitney Westerfield of the 3rd Senate District and the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I want to say thank you all for joining us for this important discussion on Kentucky Comeback. And let me just give a little background. Kentucky Comeback is a campaign to help Kentuckians struggling with substance use disorder, help businesses develop recovery-friendly work environments, and kind of helping engage Kentuckians interested in criminal justice reform. And to me, this is somewhat of a three-pronged approach, although there's all kinds of different elements you can throw into the mix, but it's broad issues. But we have, those in the trenches like Shasta who are helping treat those struggling with these disorders. And then we have those businesses and employers, a lot of who are tuned in today, who are trying to help be sensitive to the fact that a lot of our workforce in Kentucky sadly has to fight these battles with addiction. So how can we give those individuals a fair chance to kind of gain meaningful employment so that they can make a living, and so that our employers and businesses can have access to a skilled and able-bodied workforce? So that's kind of where Carter comes in, and he's got a little bit of a government perspective as well as the former mayor of Hopkinsville. And then, we have the policy element, which is why we have our House and Senate Judiciary chairs here with us today. How do we better shape the environment to help those in need in recovery and in employment, and also help those incarcerated be prepared for when they get released? But also not to lose sight of the fact that, hey, there are some still bad actors out there in the system that we certainly can't ignore, and a level of law and order and safety still has to be maintained. So it's a tricky balance, and I really appreciate everyone's time today. I want to start with Shasta. Tell us a little bit about ARC and your role there and your story, how you came about in that position.
Of course. My name is Shasta Wease. I'm a community liaison for the Elizabethtown area. ARC is an amazing program. It's we work at a holistic type avenue, and it works with the clinical, spiritual, medical, and vocational purpose. It's the career to crisis, or crisis to career module. I am in recovery myself, and next week on the 15th, I will actually have 5 years of recovery. And for me, at age 7, when I actually took my first drink, to age 38 to taking my last drink, it took me several attempts to get clean and sober. And this just isn't a disease for myself. This is a family disease. I put the ones closest to me, through the ringer as well. And I put jobs that I was in, people that did try to give me a chance. I was one of the ones that made addicts and alcoholics. I'm one of the ones that help with the stigma that's there today. But I'm also one of the ones today that have a recovery story that helped the stigma not be there anymore. I'm out here in the trenches, as you said. I want to give inmates the chance, regardless if it's their first, their second, their third, their fourth, especially repeat offenders that are not on the nonviolent, give them opportunities to go into treatment. And it starts with the judges. And what I would like to see is a policy reform. That's, something that's very big that needs to happen, because that's where it starts. Once we get the judges and the law and the policies reformed, then I believe that because that is where it starts, then the stigma will come to an end.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you, sharing your story. And I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is kind of bring people together, start these conversations with elected officials and folks like yourself. So we appreciate you joining us, and move on to Carter. Like I said, you kind of have an interesting perspective being on the economic development side, and then, working in the Chamber of Commerce before you were the mayor of Hopkinsville. So, but let's start with the local government side. I'm sure the opioid crisis statewide that we've seen gave you some tough decisions, especially with your local budgets, and kind of what was your approach in that role to helping those in your community battling addiction, Carter?
Sure, John. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. And Shasta, congratulations on 5 years. Those milestones, I know, are very cherished each day at a time. So congratulations on your continued journey, and best of luck as you go forward. If you don't mind, John, I just want to share personally, I think all of us, when we think about conversations like addiction and recovery, reintegration into the workforce of those who've been in the criminal justice system, may have personal stories, and certainly we do in my family. And so I can relate to the ideas of addiction very closely from loved ones that I know and care about, and understand how tough of a journey that can be for those who are suffering from addiction while trying to right the ship and get their lives right, the barriers that they face, and those who have also been incarcerated and the barriers that they face. So I remember a good friend of mine, and I know Representative Petrie and Senator Westerfield, Representative John Tilley, used to say, we've got to quit locking up people that we're mad at and lock up the people that we're afraid of. And I think oftentimes those incarcerated, at least in the Christian County jail system, end up being there for drug-related purposes, and often those are driven by addictions that drive those behaviors that lead them there. So, I think about that comment, that quote, and it's really helped me shape my own philosophy over the last decade or so, from being afraid of being perceived to be weak on crime to understanding about how to be smart on crime and addiction and recovery. And so that's what we try to do during my 5 years as mayor of the city of Hopkinsville, is just try to find creative ways to partner with the agencies and organizations throughout our community that are dealing within these realms. We started a couple programs that I'll highlight, but I want to say this, we didn't have it all figured out. We don't have it all figured out. There's a lot that we're not doing that we could be doing. And so I don't want anyone watching this to think that I'm suggesting that by any means we've got this all sorted out. But there were a couple programs that we started that are continuing and that we are hoping are making an impact. One was called Fresh Start. This was targeting the persistently underemployed and unemployed in our community, and trying to identify the barriers to their healthy employment, to the vibrant employment that they were desiring. And unfortunately for many of those, we realized that convicted felony status for many was the primary barrier. And again, many of that was driven by addiction issues and drug-related issues. So, but that Fresh Start program was aimed at getting individuals back into some classroom environment, some training environment that could get them into a pipeline for workforce. And that program is a cohort model, run about 8 to 10 at a time, and had been doing pretty well up until COVID-19. And I don't believe there's been a cohort over the last 6 months, but that's run through the city. And I know they're looking at getting that model back up and running as we're able to get out of the COVID-19 situation. But that's called Fresh Start, again, targeting the persistently unemployed and underemployed. A big part of that was, while developing the curriculum and reaching out to those who we were trying to service, there was also discussions with employers about, will you be willing to give a second chance to an individual that's in this situation, or perhaps a third chance, a fourth chance, depending on what the situation was. And so that's a piece that I think we have to be reminded as leaders throughout the Commonwealth, certainly leaders in Western Kentucky, that we're going to have to find compassion and grace within our policy and our decisions. And it's not just a matter of philosophy and Christian principle. If you happen to be Christian, it's very pragmatic. It's a workforce issue. And so we've got to continue to find ways to find grace and compassion in our policies as we reintegrate people back into the workforce that have had situations that I'm certain most of them would prefer not to have been involved with in the long run. So Fresh Start was one of those type programs. We were one of the first cities, I believe, to also ban the box on the felony check box. If you wanted to be hired by the city of Hopkinsville, let me clarify, that was just for city of Hopkinsville employment. Now, of course, for police and certain professions, we had to have the box for those matters, but where we could, we didn't worry about that convicted status on the front end of an interview process. It might come into it, but it wasn't going to be on the front end. And we were encouraging that for our employers throughout the community as well, and would continue as economic development director to encourage employers to consider that as an option, because there are a number of folks who made mistakes when they were younger. I had a conversation with a high school friend last week who was in a situation where he made a mistake about 20 years ago, and he's got that felony status hung around him now. He's really done everything right since then. He's paid his price, but it's really hard for him to find that long-term permanent position that provides, you know, career for him and his family. And it was a drug-related offense. So these things all tie together so consistently. So there's so many examples where if we can figure out a way to show grace and mercy in our hiring process and as we think about the workforce, we can really unlock the potential of a lot of people who are out there that just want that second or third chance, whatever that chance may be, but they really are ready. And then I'll just stop with this thought because I want to make sure that others have plenty of time here. One of the things I would like to see us doing more is in our testing policies, our workplace testing policies. I mean, this is particularly true for those who suffer from addiction, is finding ways to test to treat before terminate. And so if you've got a good person who's been working well for you and they're 18 months in, 2 years in, and they've been a good employee and they happen to fail a test, find that way of having a policy that says, let's help this person before we just discard this person and all but guarantee them into a situation that makes it very difficult to stay clean and may lead to recidivism or recovery, depending on what their situation may be. So I know that's challenging because I know the workplace has to be a controlled environment. So I certainly am sympathetic to that side of the equation as well. But those are some areas I'd like to see us thinking about, and then continuing to find ways, as we have done somewhat locally, of integrating skill development, certificate-based programs into addiction recovery centers, into jails, into places where people need to have that skill-based development so that when they leave those facilities, they have certificates that make them prepared to go and do whatever profession it is they're trying to go into. And so continuing to see those types of opportunities expand, not only in Western Kentucky, but throughout the Commonwealth, I think will help this, from a workforce perspective, help continue to connect people back into the workforce, which I think long-term is critical if we're going to help people stay clean and keep them from recidivism issues down the road. So just some thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's all about the meaningful employment for those individuals. Chairman Westerfield, been in the Senate since 2013 now, I guess, and advocate for criminal justice reform, and I know especially juvenile justice reform, which we'll let you touch on here in a bit. But you've obviously seen a lot between the Senate and being the assistant Commonwealth's attorney. Give us kind of a holistic view of how you see criminal justice reform, or the state of criminal justice reform in Kentucky, and kind of let us know, some major victories maybe, or one major victory since you've been in the legislature, that you
Well,
can.
thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here with these other great panelists and folks that I have a ton of respect for and I appreciate. We've done a whole lot in the criminal justice space. Not everything results in a bill that passes.
Sure.
And I know my co-chairman can vouch for that. Sometimes there's a whole lot of work that happens over the course of a year or two before a bill ever sees the light of day. But we've had a number of conversations, but it's all aimed at really achieving improved public safety around the state, to make our communities and make the Commonwealth a safer place to live and breathe. I had a conversation yesterday in Carter County with a victims advocacy group about something that I think is certainly one of the bigger victories, but I don't know. It's certainly one of the biggest ones to me, but it's not the only one, and that's Marsy's Law, the Crime Victims Constitutional Rights Amendment that's going to be on your ballot in about 53 or 54 days. That's a huge victory, and this is in the words of a friend of mine who's a judge down in Georgia. He said Marsy's Law completes criminal justice reform by putting a real face to the criminal justice process, and that's the victim's face, because we spend a lot of time on the offender side, but that's also appropriate. We've had expungement legislation, which took years and years to finally come through the legislature. And I credit John Tilley, I credit Chairman Petrie, Darrell Owens, and a number of other folks from the left and the right that worked really hard to get an expungement bill finally through and passed that a lot of people have taken advantage of. Just this year, we had an expungement bill that Chairman Petrie was instrumental in drafting and co-sponsoring and shepherding out of the House and over to the Senate. That's a big, huge part of not just improving public safety, but for the sake of the business owners and operators that are members of the chamber and that are listening, it's a huge part for making sure that the transition from a criminal life to a productive life in the community is huge. We want to make sure that these folks have the best transition, the best change and the most successful turning of a leaf and turning of a corner. Pick your metaphor for change and adjustment. We want to make sure it's as successful as possible, because if they don't reoffend, then there's a victim. There's a new victim that we don't have. There's a new cost on our jails that we don't have. There's a new docket spot in our courts that are overworked in a ton of places around the state that we aren't occupying. There are behavioral health and treatment costs that we're not dealing with. There's a whole, and then not to mention the benefit to that human being who's not going to be incarcerated, but is with their families, taking their kid to school or staying with them on a Zoom class, or they're at home for supper and working during the day and paying on child support or paying on their utility bills. So we spend a lot of time talking about the offenders, and I'm glad we're with Marcy's Law, and other bills like the SAFE Act and the dating violence bill back in 2015, the strangulation bill that we worked on a year or two ago. I'm glad that we're spending some time on the victims, but all of it's aimed at making sure we have a system with fewer offenders and less people in jail and more people productively living their lives as part of the community of Kentuckians.
Thank you, Chairman. And Chairman Petrie, go to you. I know Chairman Westerfield touched on one of the legislative victories from this most recent session, and talk about a couple more. I know we had probation credits as well, and some recovery through employment language that came out of the Senate. I mean, touch on any of those and just talk about, the progress from your perspective in the House.
One, thank you very much for having me on, and I've enjoyed listening to everybody else so far, so I appreciate the other panelists. Get into the meat of it. This last session, the probation and parole credit parity, we'd already had one system where if someone is on probation or parole, then they were able to get work credits and certification credits and get them ready for the workforce. Made sure that those two systems both were fully on parity, so that whether you were under probation or parole, you were able to make traction steps towards being able to be employed and get your social fabric back with your family and the community. Have those certifications needed to get you back into regular life. I was particularly pleased with that. Chairman Westerfield already mentioned the felony expungement for acquittals and dismissals, which is way more impactful than you might think at this point on the numbers. It's fairly large. A lot of people got behind that, including the chamber, and a lot of people were involved in it. It's a good bill, wipes off some of those obstacles for people who have a criminal history that shouldn't have it there, in my opinion, and makes them on par with others looking for employment and looking to move their lives forward. We had one bill that popped out of the House, passed out of the House, but didn't make it to the Senate just on a timing issue with COVID. Was a felony threshold bill that would have moved felony theft charges from $500 minimum up to $1,000 minimum. And it was a broad-based bill. It recovered many, many types of felonies that brought us in line with all our adjoining brother and sister states, as well as brought us current on dollar figures, current value of money from where that statute first started. This upcoming session, I am hopeful that we will deal with persistent felony offender in some way. I had filed a bill last session. We were not able to move it just because of timing and so many other things that had priority, but PFO is subject to modification. It really puts a millstone around people's necks if it's wrongly applied. I hope we're able to look at that. And following up with something that Chairman Westerfield said, I'm careful about whether I say we want less people in jail, and I know exactly what he means, and I'm in support of what he's saying. But to put a little finer point on that for myself, I want those people in jail that need to be in jail. Need, not want, need, not prefer, but
Yeah.
need to be in jail. Those that we can treat with mental health treatment programs, those that we can treat with substance abuse programs, those that we can treat other than with incarceration, we need to make sure we have policies and
100%.
an implementation of those policies that allows those people to be addressed in an effective manner rather than the singular bucket of incarceration. So I want to make sure that we have the appropriate persons incarcerated and otherwise treat those that's not the best pattern for. I hope Chairman Westerfield doesn't give me a bad look, but we have a project we've been working on for about a year, a little over a year at this point, trying to address the very large issue of when pretrial detentions, especially involving drug possession, or you can easily assess that it's a mental health issue is what's really
Yep.
going on with the charge, making sure that we can exit those people at the bond consideration level into a treatment pathway as soon as possible.
Chairman, if you don't mind, to give some context to that, let me share with our listeners. In the first week of December, this was part of this effort that Chairman Petrie and I have been working on for over a year now. The first week of December, I had a snapshot taken, and at that moment in time, Kentucky had 7,300 people sitting in county jails around the state pre-trial. So they haven't been convicted of anything. And those 7,300 people were folks with a Class D or other low-level offense. They didn't have any priors or holds, any warrants for some other charge they were facing somewhere else. They were nonviolent, non-serial offenders, not a PFO type offender like he described earlier. That's a huge number of people who are sitting there, the vast majority of which are sitting there because they can't afford to get out. And every stakeholder that we've talked to agrees with Chairman Petrie and me, and every other subject matter expert, that the vast majority of those folks are struggling with, as the chairman just said, some sort of behavioral health disorder, mental health, behavioral health, substance use disorder of some kind. And we've got community mental health centers in every county. They've got a presence in every county of the state. We've got private providers separate from the community mental health center network. We've got a population of people that need that care. And we've got providers ready to step in and provide the care. But I wanted to provide that number for context. 7,300. Imagine how many people, how much a difference. If we could just clear half of those people out and into, not just let them out the door, as the chairman just said, but if you could get them out separate from their charge, let their charge resolve however it needs to, but get them plugged into behavioral health care that they need to address whatever issue they're struggling with, or to get their family the care they need, what sort of transformational difference that can make.
Yeah, I agree. And from an employer standpoint, from a chamber standpoint, I mean, this is a social fabric issue, especially at that bond context, because we all know about the rules about if they're in for 3 days or 5 days, what kind of a snowball happens. You lose rent payments, you lose employment, you lose, and it snowballs on you. Well, if we can get these issues for mental health and substance abuse identified and identifiable treatment pathways that early in the bond context, then we have the hope of not having that situation snowball, which means that person gets to stay with their family. They're not ripped away from a child, a spouse, a mother, father, brother, sister. They're not ripped away from a church or another organization they belong to. They're not ripped away from an employer and all the people there. It helps the employers, it helps our entire social fabric, and is, in my estimation, most people's estimation, much cheaper economically on the state to deal with it that way than pay for the incarceration and not get a good result on the end. Following up on that, one more thing, didn't mean to take this much time, but one more thing. I know there's been interest by the chamber I've been spoken to about, and another representative recently. So I think there's going to be some bubbles of this coming up. Some type of two-pronged work certification when someone's coming off of parole or probation or leaving incarceration, so that they do have something to show for those certifications that they've worked and achieved. Show that to employers, and that gives employers insight about what type of person this may be. Number two, and I think this is the flip side of the coin, I think we're going to have to work on the employer's liability protections for hiring people that are going through substance abuse recovery, and maybe even mental health, as best we can, so that it's not take on the full business risk. If there's something in the history, and traction's been made, that person's showing progress, then at least give a little grace and leeway on the employer's side to encourage them to go ahead and employ and let that traction take full. Sorry to take so much time, but I appreciate it.
Oh, no, we definitely appreciate the insight and hearing about all those, issues that you're working on. So we'll come back to a couple of those, because I would like to see kind of the status on some of those things, but we'll move on back to Shasta. I guess, tell me, in the midst of COVID-19, how that affected your job, and what have you seen around, ARC Center that you can speak to about COVID-19? I mean, I'm guessing it's had probably a negative impact on the, population of our Kentuckians that are struggling with substance use disorder. So what have you seen? And, it's been tough for all of us, I know, but I'm sure in that regard, it's
Right.
tough.
Well, it's tough for the community liaisons, because of course we work with the judicial system, so not being able to be inside the court systems, working closely with them, but we do work from home. But being actually in the recovery community, unfortunately, we've seen a lot more overdoses, a lot of isolation, a lot more arrests, and it's very sad. The meetings have been shut down, and Zoom meetings are good, but for a lot of people, they need that one-on-one, that face-to-face, and they need the community bond. But for work, not being able to go and have that initial one-on-one with the actual inmate or that client, letting them know, hey, I've been where you're at. I know exactly how you feel. So while you're in that hole, I'm going to jump in that hole with you, and I'm going to show you how to get out, because I've been there where you're at. That's a little bit harder because you're doing it over the phone. When you're one-on-one, if they start crying, you can help them get through that. But when you're on the phone, it's a little bit harder. But that's why we're there. That's why I do what I do.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I can't imagine. I know, like I said, it's impacted everyone in different ways. We'll go back to you, Carter. I know you kind of gave a little bit of your perspective from your recent position, your new position with the Economic Development Council there in Southwestern Kentucky, but, kind of talk about just how important, a strong, healthy workforce is to when you try to attract, new business to Kentucky, and especially in your area of the state, and further ways to kind of strengthen that workforce, and especially cater to those that are struggling with these issues.
Sure. Thank you, John. And I do want to also acknowledge, as you guys were talking, Chairman Petrie, that was good information about the workforce certification type of programs that you guys are looking at. That certainly would be welcome news, I think, to employers throughout the Commonwealth to know those types of pipelines could be created. But John, really, when we think about economic development, I'm a big fan of alliteration. So I think of it in terms of the 5 Ps. And I didn't really create this, but I like it. It was Del Boyetta, an economic developer that's pretty well known throughout the country. But the 5 Ps, according to Del, are place, product, positive business climate, partnerships, and people. And I won't talk about the first 4 because they're not necessarily relevant to today. But the last one, people, is always number 1. It's the workforce. And I was actually in a meeting earlier with 2 of my counterparts from across the Tennessee line here. I'm part of a Campbell Strong Defense Alliance, which is a 6-county partnership representing Trigg, Todd, and Christian County, Kentucky, as well as Robertson, Stewart, and Montgomery County, Tennessee. And we were on a call together, and we were asked about economic development activity, and all 3 of us, without hesitation, talked about workforce. It's the number 1 issue. It's everything that we're dealing with each and every day as we think about retaining our existing industries, as well as trying to recruit new businesses and industries. And so from, again, thinking about what I said earlier, from my perspective, I've moved from the philosophical to the very pragmatic. As an economic developer, as a community leader, this is really it's about the workforce. It's about the humanity of treating people with respect and dignity. But pragmatically speaking, from an economy's perspective, it's truly about maximizing all of our workforce. And if you go back to just pre-pandemic, our region was at about 4.5% to 5% unemployment across the board. And so when we're that low, we still know that there's this untapped pool of people out there, whether they're recovery or they're incarcerated, but serving their time and trying to reintegrate when they have the opportunity. We know that they're untapped largely and that they're out there. So it is a workforce issue. And finally, I'll conclude this part of my comments, at least with, as the mayor, one of the things that I really enjoyed most was being invited to the drug court graduations. And I had a chance to attend many of those over the course of my terms here as mayor. And what always caught me and struck me was everyone who was graduating, the day they were graduating, the humility, the hope, the optimism, the sincere desire to go forward and truly succeed day to day and be able to lead a clean life. It's there. And then from there, there's all these barriers that I'm sure emerge in everybody's journey. And so as I come back to it, I just keep thinking the more as we as leaders can embrace the humanity of the situation and see the people that we're talking about, then I think the more creative and innovative we become in the solutions to helping reintegration and helping recovery. But the hope is there. Folks want to do the right thing. A big part of that is going to be, do they have the workforce opportunities that will allow them to stay on the right path? If they don't have those opportunities, it becomes very difficult to stay clean and or to stay on that path of not recidivism and not going back into the criminal justice system. So that just, again, at those drug court graduations, you see so clear the hope, you see the optimism. We need to make sure that we have those systems in place to take that hope and optimism into the life that they want, a good, productive, clean life that gives them confidence moving forward. So just some thoughts.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. Chairman Westerfield, back to you. I wanted to touch just briefly on the Jail and Corrections Task Force, and I know Chairman Petrie is a member of that as well, but maybe just kind of give an overview of that task force and what you see, maybe the end goal for that being.
Well, I think I'm glad that we've got that task force, but it came too darn late in the summer. I would like for us to have had another 2 or 3 months worth of time. Chairman Petrie mentioned this pretrial release discussion we've had, which was sort of a spinoff of a many-year ongoing bail reform conversation that a number of people have had. That alone, which is just one subject that this task force is looking at, is a humongous undertaking. And I don't know that this task force has enough time to address that one issue. But there are other ones, and I'd say the one at the top of the list we've already mentioned, and that is the importance of partnering with healthcare professionals. The very first presentation at our very first task force meeting was from a gentleman named Steve Shannon. He's the executive director for an organization known as CARP, the Kentucky Association of Regional Programs. That's the partnership of all the community mental health centers around the state, or almost all of them. That's their association, and he lobbies on behalf of the membership there on various issues that come up. But I had him talk about the relationship, or where we need to improve and make reforms in the relationships between healthcare and mental health providers and the corrections policy and universe of discussions. And it was pretty clear that there's a lot of room for improvement there. The partnerships aren't as strong as they want them to be, and there needs to be more of a warm handoff of people in either direction who are in the criminal justice system in some way, but who need access to care, or who are moving in one direction or the other. I mentioned, and it was brought up in that task force meeting, what other agencies have done. This is also, I think, something you'll see in the 21 session. We've seen a lot of coverage, understandably so, about police reform. And one of the things that we'll see, I think, in 21 might be some effort at addressing police departments. One of the things that's been a big driver there, or a big topic of discussion, are mental health units and behavioral health units within law enforcement. One of the things that came up in that first task force meeting was a model. There's one in Nashville, Tennessee, the Mental Health Cooperative, which is a gigantic behavioral health provider in Central Tennessee. They have a crisis treatment center. It's a staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it allows police to bring folks in that they've been out on a call for service. They bring those folks in that they recognize that there's a mental health issue there. And it's a 10-minute visit for the police officer, and they can get back out and do what they need to do on the street. But that person that they've caught, instead of sending them to the jail, where they're sitting in a cell with maybe nobody or maybe 100 people in an environment that's not at all helpful for their mental state or whatever issue they're dealing with, but they're immediately put into a treatment environment. It works wonders. There's a similar unit in operation in Texas with a law enforcement mental health unit and a round-the-clock staffed mental health crisis center of some kind. And that discussion was at the top of the list, and it was again on the second meeting. I think and I hope that the task force comes with some recommendations for the legislature to take up in 21. Although it'll be a shorter session, as a lot of folks watching this probably already know, in the odd years, we're only there for 30 days. There for 1 week in January, and then we take a break, and we come back in February and finish out the session. But it's not just 30 days. It's 30 days with COVID, with another 1-year budget we've got to write. So there's going to be a lot of added pressure and distraction from what we'd ordinarily be dealing with. So I hope that's what the task force can produce some results on. Not just that, there are other things, but none of them are as big, I think, as that mental health component, which again describes exactly or fits exactly with what you've heard Shasta and Carter and Chairman Petrie already talk about. It's the people and making sure that not just our workforce, but our fellow brothers and sisters of Kentucky and their families are improved and better, making our community safer at the same time.
Chairman Petrie, you want to add to that, especially on the expectations of this shortened, complicated session we're about to face?
I think Chairman Westerfield has covered it very well. It will be as Hobbes would have said, a nasty, brutish, and short life, but this will be a 30-day session that will be trying at least. We've got the budget, and understand when we talk about budget, well, you're just doing a 1-year budget. But at the same time, all the budget review subcommittees are going to be meeting. The whole process will be engaged like normal, but we'll just be doing it under a 30-day session rather than a 60, which means we have to do it in the House first and then have sufficient time to get it over to the Senate. And really that means by about mid-March, it needs to be completed and ready to pass out and look for review thereafter. And maybe even earlier than that. That's going to be tough. So criminal justice reforms, Chairman Westerfield and I continue working, and we have some good things, I think, in the pipeline, but it's going to be, it'll be a trying session. And I don't want to set the expectations too high. I would rather set them too low at this point because I'm not sure how this is going to work. Understand, we still don't know what the procedures will be by edict on high of what we're going to be doing inside the LRC annexes. So do we have people coming in and out for committee meetings? Can we have visitors like we've had before? Can lobbyists come in and help assemble information? Are we allowed to go back into the Capitol certain hours or what? So I'm not even sure what the protocol is for just the raw logistics of getting things done under that tight 30-day session.
And I'll ask a little bit on the pretrial effort comments you mentioned before, but what's kind of like the status of those discussions? And I mean, we didn't have any formal legislation on that last session, unless I'm mistaken or I missed that, but I think that's something I probably would have seen or heard about. So I was just kind of curious, where that stands.
There were multiple meetings, and I would say scores of hours of meetings in person and by remote with all kinds of stakeholders regarding pretrial bond reform. Early in the process, I made a statement, and it's been quoted in the press, and I still stand by it. And I think in our last judiciary meeting, when the Administrative Office of the Courts was presenting statistical information about the Supreme Court's COVID procedures for a bond that were put in place, I brought it back up again. Bond is set by Constitution. Everyone's entitled to a reasonable bond unless it's a capital offense. When I read that, that informs me that the judiciary, that branch of government, has full authority and spectrum to have its own proper practices the way bonds should be set. So if the Supreme Court or all divisions of the courts were to get together and say, this is the way we want to work pretrial, they can do that without legislative guidance. And in fact, I've stated this before, I'll state it again, I'm not sure why the judiciary would not want to do that through administrative release protocols. Otherwise, it would appear from the outside looking in that the judiciary would invite the legislative branch to come into its arena and tell it what to do. That seems a little contrary to the way human nature and the way government works. So they have protocols that went into place. I'm hopeful that they'll continue to work on those, interact with their district judges, their circuit judges, reflect on data, and I'm hopeful that they will continue to work the issue of bond and adjust it in the future. So with a smile on my face, I can say hopefully that issue will not come back up again this next session, that the Supreme Court and the judiciary as a whole will address that successfully.
Okay, so
The court is always so responsive to everything we want them to do.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, for advocates like this network that we're trying to build here with Kentucky Comeback, what would your advice be? How do we approach the court and the judiciary to try to move that needle, I guess?
The Chief Justice has a phone number at an office in Frankfort. All the justices on the Supreme Court have the same. AOC is readily accessible. I'll be glad.
I know the first district Supreme Court justice's number real well.
So I'll be happy to facilitate, set the back of the meeting, put one together. They take input. They're the best situated to understand what happens in those courtrooms. You know, I've stated this to fellow legislators. I mean, I've been an attorney, I've been a felony prosecutor, criminal defense, state and federal court, done so for a little over 22 years. You cannot imagine the myriad circumstances of facts that came up every day, hundreds of times when bond decisions are made, and they're made under tight pressures. Okay, with that being said, those judges are on the front line, and the Supreme Court as an administrative head is in a far better position to understand those issues and come up with protocols than 138 legislators whom a lot have never been in a courtroom before. And a lot have never practiced in criminal court. The judiciary is far better situated to take care of it if they will.
Now, if they just let Jason and I do it and just vote for what the two of us come up with, it would work, but we can't do it that way.
Well, that's an obvious. I didn't want to state that one, but I agree, yes.
Shasta, moving back to you, I just want to ask, what would be your message to business owners or to, legislators as well? I mean, how can we better come together from your perspective to help those in recovery, and why is this so important? I mean, just you're summarizing, because we're getting close to the end here. So yeah, just kind of.
I just want to touch base. I've been hearing a lot about the certificates real quick. I mentioned it earlier about the crisis to career, and I just want everybody to understand that ARC does do that. We have 4 phases. The first phase is roughly 30 to 45 days. The second phase is roughly 45 days. The third phase, we actually offer Peer Support Academy, and they do get a certificate. And if they graduate, they can go into the 4th phase, which is 4 to 6 months, and they intern. Now, 80% that have graduated out of the Peer Support Academy are still in recovery and are actually employees of ARC today. Wow. So, we do offer that. And I just wanted to, to mention that. And as far as what I would say to the businesses, for me, I know that it's real hard because of the stigma. It comes down to the low-level nonviolent, offenders. If there could come up with a policy within the company that if it's a nonviolent offender and, they have the 60 to 90-day probationary period. If the policy could be made for, nonviolent offenders to do a maybe a 6-month probationary period, and maybe have 6 months clean and sober time. You know, a lot of people go into companies and they're scared to even say that they're in recovery. They're scared to say that, hey, I've had this, you know, I suffer from addiction or alcoholism, because they're scared they're not going to be, you know, looked at to get the job. They're going to be looked down on. If we could be more honest, if people could go in thinking, I'm not going to be looked down on, I can be honest with these people and I still could have a chance at this job. I think that would help a lot of people, and I think that would actually help the jobs as well. And as far as the drugs, the drug policy, we are actually trying to team up with local factories, and instead of them firing the employees, we are trying to team up to get them the help that they deserve. So ARC is actually working on that right now. I'm working closely with the factories here in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, as well as the ones in Louisville, and trying to get policies set up instead of, you know, employees losing their jobs, letting them have a second, third chance, sending them to treatment so they can go back to their families. They can go back to their jobs. They can learn about recovery, and they don't have to lose as much as maybe the next one to them has.
No, I definitely appreciate that message. Those are great comments, and we definitely appreciate you joining us. Carter, do you have some final thoughts as we kind of wrap up here, and, you know, take a couple minutes to kind of bring it all home here?
I appreciate again the opportunity, and Shasta, the passion that you have is so clear, and good programs that we're hearing about. So hope to be able to share that with some of the others throughout Western Kentucky, the other programs that are there. But I'll encourage those who may be watching. There's a great book that I read a few years ago. The title is "Why Don't They Just Get a Job?" And it was an analysis of the area around Cincinnati and some folks who are working in the unemployment, underemployed arena, and the struggles that they ran into when they dealt with the clientele that were convicted felons, struggling with substance abuse, struggling with child care access, transportation, all the different things that keep the workforce from being truly unlocked. And I think it's a great book. It's a great way of seeing the humanity of the situation, and to understand that that's what we're talking about. Is we are talking about a workforce, but at the end of the day, there are people who've made mistakes that are trying to find their way back to the right path. And we can either be part of the solution or we can be part of the problem. And I hope that we all find ways to be part of the solution. Thank you all for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you, Carter. Chairman Westerfield, I know I said you'd have a little time to talk about juvenile justice. So if you want to, you know, take a couple minutes, we've got about 10 minutes left here. So, you know, 2 or 3 minutes. If you want to go on that,
But,
if you have some other closing thoughts, you know.
Well, I was going to mention one other thing that I think is going to come up in 21, and it's a good closing thought. You know, we've spent a lot of time on the criminal justice system, and we think about it as we've talked about it. We're talking about adults here on this conference call right now, but we've got a whole lot of juveniles that find their way into the adult system who were once in the juvenile system. And we need to do our best to make sure we avoid that, obviously, for a number of reasons, for that child and future adult, for the pressure it puts on the system apart from the child and their family. There's a great quote, and it really dictates what I do on juvenile justice reform and how I view it and the way I try to achieve the different things that I'm working on. And it's a Frederick Douglass quote that says, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We have an opportunity when people are young to change the trajectory of their lives, to make it an incredible improvement, and to change by an order of magnitude how much better off they are, their families are, their communities are by extension, if we can do right by them when they're younger and give them the best opportunities for success, and realizing that not all families and not all children grow up in environments that are as helpful and as fostering and as loving and as kind and as good as mine was, as a lot of others are. There are a lot of children that grow up in hardship, and a lot of those grow up in areas where gravitating to crime is something they naturally do. We want to try to improve all of that we can, and there are a number of things that we can do. One big issue that remains in the juvenile justice system, you see it in the adult system as well in various parts of the state, and that's the disproportionate minority contact that we have with juveniles and in the adult system, but particularly in the juvenile system, we can see places in Christian County. Here in Christian County, it's one of the worst in the state, not by raw numbers, but by the percentages. We have a disproportionate number of Black and brown kids caught up in the juvenile justice system relative to their share of the overall population. And there are some things that we can do to address that. One of those that I worked on this year, but COVID messed it up along with some other factors, but it's actually BR number 1. And that is, and Chairman Petrie knows it was this year's Senate Bill 87. It's a bill to eliminate the automatic transfer of a juvenile kid's case in district court up to circuit court where they're tried and prosecuted as an adult. And I could go for another 20 minutes explaining all that, except to say that there's a DMC, a disproportionate minority issue there. And we can eliminate that without affecting or harming public safety. And so that's one small, tiny fix that we can do. And I hope that we do a lot of others. All of this is aimed at, again, making sure that we give Kentuckians the best chance and our communities the best chance at success and safety. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the call with these fine folks today. Thanks, John.
Like I said, we definitely appreciate your time and insight. Chairman Petrie, bring us home.
All right. Well, thank you, John, and thank you everybody for being on the panel and everyone attending. I hope that everyone has pulled something from it, encouraging, and even gotten some new ideas or seeds for ideas of how to move forward. For the sake of Carter, one of my sayings is this: punish the act, partner with the person. So yes, in criminal justice, when someone does something wrong, when prosecutors and defense counsel get together, we don't decide, and a jury doesn't decide, and a judge doesn't decide, this is a good person, this is a bad person. That never even comes into our calculation. Our analysis for the criminal justice system is always, did this person commit a criminal offense? Was there an act that was wrong? You punish that act. You don't punish the person, you punish for that act. And then you partner with that person because that person, as Chairman Westerfield knows and gives some great statistical information about, most everyone who goes incarcerated comes back out. And so they're going to be with you when you go to the grocery store, the post office, and everywhere else, getting your hair cut in the future and everything else. So you better be partnering with that person if they've made a bad act, a criminal act of some sort. Punish the act, partner with the person, get the credentials, get the work certifications, get them the documentation they need, make sure there's traction so that they can do the right thing. When you partner with someone, it takes both of you. It's kind of like being married. One of you can't do all the effort. So if they want to partner, then you need to be willing and ready. And then the other, and a distinction in that is this: when you have true victims, victims of violence, victims of property theft, that partnering and that punishment may be a little bit different, but a lot of our conversation going on today has been with what, I'm not going to say victimless crimes, but no direct victim. The direct victim is a defendant himself who's had, or herself who's had, substance abuse or mental health issues. Those are true. You need to be ready to partner, punish the act if they've done something, but recognize it for what it is. That victim is the defendant himself or herself, most likely. Partner with them so that they can proceed and get traction and return to normal life like the rest of us are able to enjoy. So if we can keep those distinctions in mind, and then Carter, remember, you like the alliteration, so punish the act, partner with the person. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all to all of our panelists for taking the time today. And thanks for all of the registrants who tuned in. Be sure to log on to KentuckyComeback.com and sign up to join our network. I posted a link to that in the chat there, and it'll keep you up to date on all our issues, future webinars, and give you outlets to contact some of these folks for some follow-up. So like I said, I appreciate your time and hope everyone has a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good one. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.